Okay, we're back for part two of Friedrich Nietzsche and Beyond Good and Evil, a prelude to the future, or prelude for the future. I forget what the preposition is in English. To the future, for the future, or whatever. I don't know how much that Victoria, who edits these things, is cutting out that I talk about, because I'm like a diesel engine. I warm up and I'm getting into this like modus where my mind adjusts to a topic, and it's actually kind of referencing that topic while I'm talking. But for people that don't know about the topic or don't know the topic well, they think I'm just babbling before I get into the meat and potatoes of the topic. So I don't know how much you cut out, but we'll start out today with talking a little bit about Friedrich again, about the author. That's important to know something about the author of Beyond Good and Evil. Beyond Good and Evil, he writes that, Friedrich Nietzsche, coming off of So sprach Zarathustra. Thus spake Zarathustra in the original English. I think now you can get versions that are something like Thus spoke Zarathustra. But at any rate, one of my wife's aunts had an original of Beyond Good and Evil. Yeah, an original. And I think they had a great-grandfather that was into philosophy and gave me the original with the original German writing, which from that time is always...
Unreadable.
It's unreadable, but like anything, you get used to it, and it helps. You get used to it. But it is very, very difficult to read the original German text. Not because of what's in it, but because of the letters that are the written. There's nothing written that way anymore. I don't know when they stopped doing that. I think it was sometime after World War II, or in the 30s they stopped writing that way. Stopped using the original German alphabet, but and they adopted like a normal print alphabet. But it made it kind of interesting. You get into it. I've read Kafka. I've read a lot of things. Kafka in that original and a few other things. Usually books that I have taken, how should I say, that I have borrowed for a long, they're overdue, period of time from the library that are like not originals, but were from the time before the Second World War. And so that's one thing about Nietzsche, is that, he wrote at a time when people had written things differently, if you're reading it in the original German. I don't know how much you left in, but I'm gonna go back to horses. People don't like to, people look at me and say, I don't want to hear about horses. But Friedrich Nietzsche has a very, very strong, and by the way, yesterday I realized I didn't finish my story about Turin in Italy. But it all starts, because people say that's not a true story. That while Friedrich Nietzsche, I think it was in the 1890s, was in Turin, or maybe that's not true, maybe it was the late 1880s, in Turin in Italy, and in the later part of his life, that in the Marktplatz, in the Palazzo there, he witnessed somebody. You have to imagine that the world was, everywhere you went, everywhere you walked, everywhere you turned, there was a horsey, because that's the thing that people used to get around. So there was horse poo, horse manure, horse smell, horses doing what horses do, running off, spooking, or just standing there, pooping, all over you. In any city you went to, didn't matter where you were, there were horses in the world. It's not that long ago, there were something like 20,000 horses still in New York City up until almost 1920, after the First World War. So it's not really that long ago. When Jack Dempsey was the heavyweight champion of the world, most people were walking, like I said, taking a bike or riding a horsey, or of course you could take the train, but there was nothing else. So just one quick thing. How are you doing today before I dive into this?
All right.
Okay, good. And Friedrich Nietzsche loved horses, and he was good at it. He was a good rider, and I think I explained yesterday, I don't know if you're going to leave this in, that being able to sit a horse correctly and look good while doing it was a very romantic thing for women. It was a status symbol. It meant that there was something about you that you could do that others couldn't. You looked good. And women, even today, that are into horses, when they see a dude that's a very good rider, and I mean not just Western, not just some cowboy on Yellowstone, but in the dressage arena or jumping, you're not. I see you're like putting your eyebrows together and a crease in your head because you're not into it. But horsey girls and women still today carry that gene from their great-grandmothers, that they get horny when they see a guy with a nice figure in a saddle on a beautiful mount. And your great-grandmother or great-grandmother probably was like, damn, that guy can sit the trot. Ooh, he's got so much tact when he's riding. And what's important about that is Nietzsche was really good at it. He was really good at it, and his commanding officers make note of that. He was in the cavalry, and he was in an artillery unit, but in Naumburg, I think it was, but in the Prussian military, in the cavalry. And you didn't get to be in the cavalry. You had to have three things to be in the cavalry. You had to have some sort of standing or class, socially and financially. His father was a minister, and maybe came from people that had a little more money. And you had to also be able to ride already. They didn't just throw, later in the World War I, they literally did throw guys into a saddle and taught them how to ride, but you kind of had to know what you were doing up there already. And to be able to ride well was not just a big deal, but everybody rode. It's not like today where if you have a lot of money, you can buy an expensive horse, buy an expensive dressage saddle, get a good trainer, do everything you have to do. And then you can ride. Maybe, most people don't, but maybe you ride well. Back in those days, I'll explain it this way. This is a way to explain it. A Comanche 15-year-old Indian in the 1860s, it's about 10 years after Nietzsche was born, without really thinking about it, could gallop bareback on a horse and kind of lay on the horse's side like on bareback, shoot an arrow, and hit something at 15 meters without even thinking about it. It's between 20 and 50 meters. Today, a person standing with a very modern, high-powered, incredibly expensive bow at 50 meters or 100 meters in Olympic archery has a hell of a time trying to hit the bullseye every time. So people tend to think that now is better than then, but it's not. And when it comes to riding, a dressage rider today, especially with all the little tricks that they use and the kinds of saddles and things, back then would have just, it wouldn't have been much. And that sounds crazy, but people fall into the now is better than then fallacy and don't realize that. So back then, the entire regiment, the entire military, except for the normal foot soldiers, are in a saddle. And your life, your honor, and your ability to survive is dependent on how well you have trained that nag under you and how well you can ride. So it's not like, oh no, on Saturday, let's get mommy, can you pack up the trailer, help me put the horse in. I want to do a little intermediate level dressage or jumping, after school or whatever. And then, mommy brings a picnic and it costs $300 for the day in Germany. And you're riding against a bunch of average people. No, you were galloping out onto the battlefield at full speed with a sword in your hand. Your horse had to be able to maneuver with the lightest of help. You were dueling with a sword or a lance. And then later, not at Nietzsche's time, but later, the horses you had to shoot from the horse and stuff. And I mean, at Nietzsche's time also, but Nietzsche's time, you're doing a lot of charging. And of course, then in full open field battle with your horse. Your horse was your legs. And this guy got high points. Now, another thing was saddles were different. Saddles were made for distance. Today, a saddle is kind of a soft thing except for Western saddles. Western saddles are made for working all day with them. But they were little like Western saddles. They weren't these little tiny jumping saddles or these very utilitarian and tool-like dressage saddles where you get on them, you get on the horse, and for 45 minutes you're going to work. But if you ride a horse longer with those saddles, and a lot of people do today, and they make that mistake, they're a little too hard on the horse's back. Saddles were made, they were hard on the rider, but easier on the horse. And they had They were very hard. The seat was very hard. There was almost no leather on the seat at all. It was just what's called the tree of the saddle, which is like a piece of wood. And it was high up in the front where your crotch is, the pommel, and the cantle, whatever it's called, the back, was high up as well. If you want to see what Nietzsche was riding in, just Google, Kavalleristen or Husaren or cavalry saddle, Germany, 1860. That's the saddle he's riding in. It ain't pretty. It's a hard saddle. You're riding on a piece of wood, and then of course the side that the horse has on his back is softer, and then blankets and that sort of thing. The reason I mention this is because of that saddle and the horse, but because of that saddle, even if this horse had a modern saddle, this horrible thing would not have happened to Nietzsche. He was doing a drill where I think they shoot from the ground and then jump on the horse and gallop away, or gallop in a direction. And he missed his foot in the saddle. The horse spooked. He jumped up, went to go put his left foot in the stirrup, missed it, and the horse spooked, jumped up in the air, and smashed the pommel into his chest, breaking the ribs in his chest and separating his pectoralis on his left side. So Nietzsche fell off the horse in excruciating pain and was taken away on a stretcher. And it hurt his body so bad that having a broken bone in the pectoralis area and tearing that area. And I don't know how well you know horses, but when a horse spooks, 1,500 pounds of animal jumping up with you, I know Western guys that are scared to death of that horn hitting them in the chest and getting impaled on it. So when they start the young horses under the saddle, they won't do it they have a Western saddle that doesn't have a horn on it. They won't do it because that horn will kill you. Well, that's what happened to Nietzsche. It could have killed him, but it damaged him pretty bad. Bad enough that it ended his ability to ride because he was so damaged in the upper body. So Nietzsche, and here's the thing you have to also understand, how crazy times used to be. Today, if your son were Friedrich Nietzsche at school, moms would be saying, my little, because I used to be a teacher, you know how it is. They come up to you and go, oh, little Friedrich is hochintelligent, highly intelligent, he's special. And the helicopter moms, especially in Germany today, would never let little Friedrich go to war. Right now, all the helicopter moms of Gen Z and millennials are having a freak out in Germany. What are they going to do? What kind of attorneys are they going to get? Or what doctors are they going to go to exclude little 2026 Friedrich from going to the draft? Because Germany is reinstating the draft, which is between the ages of, I guess, every young boy, don't quote me on this, between 17 and 25 eventually. No, it's higher now. They're talking about going higher, is going to be war material, Kriegsmaterial.
I think it's up to 45.
I think it's up to 45, yeah. Jeez. And kids that are 18 right now, boys that are 18 have to register for the military. And if you're between 18 and 45 and you're a German man, you have to, when you are leaving the country for longer than 3 months now, you have to, according to what I read, I don't know if this is true, in Germany, you have to get a note from the Bundeswehr, from the German military, saying, it's okay for you to leave if you're going to be leaving the country longer. So if Germany's gearing up for war, that's what it looks like. I don't know if that's the real intent of what's going on. Nobody does. But it's definitely making these kids that are the millennials who are used to safe spaces, and the only time they ever saw war was maybe Call of Duty. They're playing Fortnite. This is the most passive generation of kids. They've been mothered to death. And parents, and I know parents that are freaking out about this. Ironically, I know boys that are like, no, that's a good thing. I'm doing maybe my A-levels, Abitur. I wanted to study. But, this is, some of the kids are kind of into it, but not many. Most of them are like, screw that. I'm not going to do this. But when Friedrich Nietzsche in 1860s, there was a war, the Franco-Prussian War, I think it was, if I remember correctly, coming up, but there was also 1864 in Denmark. The Prussians were everywhere. It was not a matter of, oh no, how do I save my skin? Your status as a human being in society, as a man, your mental status, you had a drang, as Nietzsche put it, a desire to get your ass to the military. It was the end-all and be-all of being a Prussian. And Prussian society, I used to talk to a friend of mine, and I would say, who studied history, his name was Alexander, how would you describe Prussian society? And he was one of these millennial guys that they're all into Star Wars and Star Trek. You know what I'm talking about? And he would say, well, they're a little bit like the Klingons from Star Trek, which was this war people who only could establish, or today people would say they were like, probably don't know them, but the Predator movies, there's like 6 of them or 7 of these Predator movies, and the Predator lives for hunting, and he goes to each planet and hunts, and their whole vocabulary, what they are, and their status in society is based upon all the killing they do. Well, sorry to say, Prussian society was at that level. If you wanted to be anything, if you wanted to be a Beamter, a bureaucrat, you had to have had a military career, not have been in the military, a military career. You had to have been something of an officer. If you wanted to be a school teacher, then you were definitely, a Hauptmann. You were a captain. You were something, a major, colonel, maybe not, but you were at a high level. And women, I think I said this before yesterday, looked at men during that time. I was kidding about what they looked at. They looked at how they looked on a horse. They looked at their facial hair, the mustache, right? I don't know if you took that out, but facial, like, ooh, did you see how he sits that tricaner? Did you see how he could control that mare? And how he looks? And oh my God, his mustache is as big as my forearm. Oh, be still my heart. And Nietzsche had that going for him. He had long legs. He was a good rider. He had the mustache. He was the quintessential romantic period, Sturmdrang, romantic, whatever period of German man. And he was in the Prussian military. Woohoo! Girls were going crazy. The girls liked it. But he had competition with every other guy. Otto Bismarck. He had competition with all these guys. And what he needed, his edge, he's like, damn, I'm good at training this horse. I can make it do shoulder in and, whatever the heck he's doing with this horse. But I need my edge, and the edge would be a war. Now, this is a romantic period. This is the last romantic period in modern European history. I don't care what anybody says, there's no romantic period. And this is something that you notice, first of all, not just in Nietzsche's life, but the idea of war was romantic. There was the possibility of death, honorable death, death for your country and your comrades. There was the possibility of heroism. Is that a word? Of being heroic. There was the possibility of coming home with medals on your chest. And you met the enemy, the fiend, in an open field with steel in your hand and bested him on your nag, on your clunker, on your horse, which wasn't a nag. It was probably a tricaner. Tricaner were great horses in those days, for those that know anything about horse flesh. They were great horses. Now I'm not going to say anything bad, but they were different. And you met them on the field. This was a time when men went to war with big woolly hats on their head with a freaking skull on it to scare the shit out of people. And it was a time that if you came from a noble, ruling, or upper class, and you were able to have the luck that there was a war on, that there was a battle in your future, you were so hungry for it, you would go to these Verbindungen. And if you were at the university, a Verbindung is like today, fraternity. a university fraternity. And they still have, by the way, nobody talks about this in Germany, but I know because I've been to them. Well, I've been to them in the early 2000s. Schlagende Verbindungen, where they take, those are fraternities where the people have this tradition of the military in them. And they put goggles on now, but they don't want to lose an eye. And they put something over their neck, but they don't want to hit something on their neck that'll make them bleed to death. But they hold the swords over their heads, these 18 to 25-year-old guys, sometimes a little older, and they swing the swords back and forth and try to protect each other until one fucks up and they cut their face with the sword. Now I have friends that did this and they have a little cut, a lot worse than shaving. And when they see that cut, it is a sign. You're like me. You were, it's like remember the Christians that would do like a little bow in the sand, and then the other one make a fish out of it. By the way, people don't realize that's the earliest sign of Christianity, and then the cross came just a bit later, and then the letters that represented Christ's name came a little later than that. But anyway, let's get back on track. They could see that on each other. I mean, they were all fun ensues, fun whatever, fun Hanover, fun Renzel, or whatever their names are, fun Obolensky. But to have that mark, and if you want to see something horrifying, look at the military upper echelon of war-hungry, war-tired sometimes, because they did a lot. There was a lot of war in life back then. Men, and some of the photos, the early photographs, and pieces of their face that are missing. It didn't come from the battles. I mean, a lot of them had scars from battles. It came from being at the university and doing that with a sword. And in those days, they'd be missing a part of their nose, or a part of their cheek would be cut off. They had some nasty-ass scars just to say, I'm a member of the Prussian, or I should say, German military class. And having facial scars from war? Oh, that was like, what do the Germans call it? The Sahnehäubchen. That was the icing on the cake. If you could go to war and lose a hand, an arm, an eye, or God forbid, half your face be burned, you were in like Flynn. In society, you were respected. So, and if you see the movie it's a Danish movie called 1864, the fear that the poor Danes have, it reminds me of the Hobbits in the first Hobbit movie, running from the Black Riders with those horses that would make that creepy noise, that noise, and the Hobbits are hiding from them. Well, the little Danes in that movie, they're trying to give you a feel for it, are running and hiding from Prussian Hussar and Prussian dragoons, Prussian cavalry. And the Prussian cavalry had this horn, this creepy ass horn, that would echo. It wasn't really like a bugle, like a charge bugle that the United States cavalry had. They had some creepy, like wrong sounding horn. And when people heard that coming, they knew three things were happening. They knew it was the cavalry. They knew that these people in that level of cavalry had seen a lot of battles and were going to take no quarter. There was no going there and saying, we found a bunch of Danish guys waving a white flag. No, they killed you. And they knew it was not going to be a death that would be nice. If the Prussians were known for, if they could get off their horse and torture you with a blunt object or with a sword, that gave them more honor than to just shoot you. So it wasn't going to be fun. And in 1864, the movie about the Danes fighting, the poor Danes fighting the Prussian army, those poor Danes didn't know what they got into. You feel that fear when the Prussians are coming, and then this one Prussian cavalry officer gets out of his horse when they find the Danes, and he walks slowly through the snow, and his face is burned because he's been in battles for the last 35 years. It looks like someone poured acid on his face, but his face got set on fire. And he says, "Ihr verdammte Dänen." the hate, abgründige Hass, the tief hate inside of these Prussian officers could be felt immediately as soon as they were standing against you. So this is the world that Friedrich Nietzsche is writing. Plus you have a romantic that men and women have that hasn't existed since then. Men worshipped women. Women were seen as something that were put upon a pedestal. Nietzsche asked a woman to marry him 3 times, who was his friend, 3 times, but 3 times she turned him down. And he didn't do it like, hey, let's get married, baby. He got down on his hands and knees. He proposed. He wrote poetry. He offered her everything. And 3 times she rejected him. And then he didn't ask her again after 3 times. It's like baseball. 3 strikes, you're out. And I don't know why she didn't marry him. Who knows? I know she did marry someone else that was a friend of Nietzsche's later. But to make a long story short, women, if you went to war, you wanted to come back so that your wife or your girlfriend or the woman that you were, that you were engaged to, it was incredibly important that you come back with honor. And before I get on to Nietzsche's girlfriend, who was a Russian, by the way, how's that grab you? She was from Russia, but sort of like you. I'll explain that in a second. But she was, geographically from Russia. Nietzsche had this problem that all got taken from him when he injured himself with that stupid-ass saddle. Talk about bad luck. He's got it all going for him. He puts his foot in the stirrup. The mare rears up, kind of crow hops. Crow hopping is like bucking, like with all 4 legs at the same time. Not bucking with the back legs in there, like hopping with all 4 legs. Right into his chest, smashes his chest, separates his sternum. He falls on the ground, and he is injured. So he said, okay, this is what I'll do. I'm not going to go home. This is embarrassing. I'm a young guy. All my friends I got these beautiful swords and they're running around. They're going to go fight the French. They're going to go fight the Danes. I'm not going to go home. So he gets himself into, what's it called? He gets himself into the hospital, into the military hospital. As he was in the military hospital, but afterwards he works there. He goes to work there. And one can say that of all, not of all I would say there's a couple of philosophers. I can think of one. I wouldn't really call him a philosopher, but yeah, I guess you would. That's in the Bible. That seemed to have worse luck, but he seemed to wanted that luck. But Nietzsche's got the worst luck of any philosopher I've ever seen. There are philosophers that have worse things that happen to them, but because Nietzsche's trying so hard just to have this great life and stupid shit keeps happening to him, he gets that job. And what people don't understand is that Nietzsche is going to be surrounded by men that are bleeding to death, that have been shot, that are wounded. War is a bloody, horrible, flesh-ridden, terrible event. And Nietzsche is walking back and forth with these stretchers, carrying Germans, Prussians, to the hospital. That was his job. And you have cuts on yourself, and he gets infected with a couple of diseases. Diphtheria, I think, is one. And I can't think of what the other one is. And both of them wreak havoc on him. And needless to say, I mentioned it yesterday, at the time that all this romantic was going on, that men, someone would say today, when men were men, when men went to war because, they maybe in some ways they were very foolish. They couldn't wait to get on the battlefield and die. They had romantic ideals of it. At that time, syphilis was everywhere. I think I talked about it yesterday. Mm-hmm. That Manet, one of my favorite painters, not Monet, but Manet, was blind because of syphilis. And Nietzsche gets infected by one of the people bleeding into a cut that he has. And his health now, after getting his sternum torn and breaking his ribs with the trichéner mare, now he has, I shouldn't laugh, but it's almost laughable because it's just ridiculous that this man has the next thing that happens. His forever now, his health will be destroyed. And he's living in a society, a Prussian society, based on strength, based on what the Germans call Tugend, or what the Prussians call Primärtugend, which I think the best translation of that in English is valor. The society was based on, Prussian society was based on valor, how honorable you were in the things you did, but valor, military valor. And now he can't do any of those things. And everyone he knows is coming back from the war or in the war. Some aren't coming back. A lot are dying, because that's what war does. It kills young men. And Nietzsche is now sick for the rest of his life. And the idea of strength, which is presupposed, which is instilled in him in his Prussian, with the whole Prussian traditions, and the idea of health become premier important in Nietzsche's philosophy, in his philosophy. You will see that strength and health, you will see a lot about it in Beyond Good and Evil, and health less, but later the genealogy of morals and whatever's coming after that. I dropped something. Becomes more important for Friedrich Nietzsche. The other thing that I wanted to say is that he's in Turin later in life. I've talked about his love for horses and riding. He sees someone beating a horse, and we don't know, because we don't have a doctor's writing on what Nietzsche had exactly. But the way he's acting, his eyesight getting worse and worse, and his behavior becoming more and more erratic, the ideas of him, people writing about him dancing naked all over the place. We're looking at an advanced stage of syphilis. That's what we're getting a look at later in Nietzsche's life. A genius, a romantic, a man who has incredibly bad luck. And while he's in Turin, he sees someone beating a horse, and he goes over and he grabs the horse. There's one version where he grabs the whip out of the man's hand, and he begins to whip the man, and the man runs away, and he hugs the horse's head, and he says, "I understand you." And people are like, "What is that nutcase doing over there? This is not the behavior of a gentleman, befit, or whatever it's called, of a gentleman Prussian in Italy, in Turin." But that story, whether true or not, and I tend to think, with what I know about Nietzsche, I could really see that being true. But I could also see how people would romanticize it. But the other stories, which are definitely true, of him beginning to, for lack of a better expression, lose his mind, are true. Now, about his girlfriend, I can't remember her name right now, but her name is actually a German name. We could look it up if you want, but she has a German name. She has a German name, with a fun on it. Fun means that she is an Adel. She is of royalty. And her family I don't think they were Jesuits. I think they were Huguenots. And they fled persecution as Huguenots to Russia. And she spoke German, of course, and she was Russian. Oh, you got it for me. Lou Andreas-Salomé, a Russian-born intellectual writer. That's what I said. And later one of the first female psychoanalysts. They met in 1882, and Nietzsche was captivated by her brilliance, but she rejected his marriage proposal, leading to a bitter break, it says here on AI. What you have to do is go on to the Wiki and see what that name, Lou Andres, see what her real name was, because she shortened it. She had a fun in it. And if you go on to something that's a little bit more, what was her real name? Her real name was Louisa Fun Salome. There we go. Or you can say this because you speak Russian, and you can say you can say it with a Russian accent, but she Russified her name.
It's Luisa Gastanovna Salome.
Gastanovna Salome. Yeah. And I'm looking at this, and let's see. I don't see any picture. I see one picture of her, and I'm not too impressed. She had nice cheekbones, I guess, and she had a very full mouth, but she was a psychoanalyst at a time when that seems like an early thing to even use as a name. Here she is, probably about the time Nietzsche. Oh, she was cute.
if you say so.
As a man, I'm looking at a picture of, it says circa 1880. She's very sporty looking. Of course, women would wear this thing around their waist that would pinch it down to about 18 inches. So, she looks like she has a very narrow waist there. She was born in St. Petersburg. See? Anyway, Russian, German, and French. That's where the Salome comes from. Well, anyway, this was the woman that here's a picture of Nietzsche and his buddy. Nietzsche with his crazy-ass mustache. His friend is clean-shaven. How is he ever going to get a woman? And her standing there, what does she have in her hand? Is that a riding crop? Or is that a cat and nine tails? What kind of a pervy thing is going on with these people?
That's
it's a whip.
What do you call it? Is it?
Will you tell me what you think it is?
What do you use them? You can make a circle with them. What are they called?
You can make a circle with them. A pencil? I don't know what you're talking about. Well, what is it? Tell me.
I don't know.
So on the 13th of May, Nietzsche was alone with Salome, and he earnestly proposed marriage to her again. This must be the second time. And she again rejected him. He was happy to continue with the plans for an academic commune. Oh, that's right. I forgot to mention this. That Nietzsche and his buddy and her and some other people had decided they were going to move in together and start an artist, philosopher, an academic commune. I don't know if they ever did. I know that Nietzsche's sister, who, I hate to say this, but I'm just going to say it, and it sounds like a complete bitch, said to Nietzsche, told Nietzsche that this woman was a hussy, that she was, he did not actually, whatever, Nietzsche's sister must have been a force to reckon with, because here's this great man, okay, who's obviously very ill, so he needed help, but this great mind, and his sister forced him to stay away from her in the end. And he was, she was the thing that stood between him and this woman's friendship. At any rate, so I wanted to give you a little background. And the reason I'm telling you about this is when you read, let's say, Beyond Good and Evil, the style, well, the first thing is it's difficult. I don't care how intelligent you are. Nobody can tell me that reading Nietzsche is easy. The thing that Jordan Peterson says, that Nietzsche, he writes with a hammer. Well, he certainly does. He packs a lot into what he's writing, into these little paragraphs. And Jordan Peterson says because Nietzsche was sick, he had to do a lot of thinking because writing was physically difficult for him. So he had to do a lot of thinking before he would write. He was ill, so sitting down and writing and going through that whole process would take more out of him because he didn't have much to give physically than, let's say, Truman Capote, who could sit down and write for 5 days straight and be drunk while he was doing it. Little Truman didn't seem to have any ailments. Just using a writer to compare. So that's what makes Nietzsche difficult, I think. And then, of course, his mind he can draw from things like you wouldn't believe, from languages and different ways of thinking. So you kind of have to know a lot of history, and you have to know a lot of philosophy, and maybe even things in general, and a lot about things happening in the academic, philosophical world, the historical world, and science during the time of Nietzsche to read it. Or you just read it and just Google every 2 minutes to figure out what he's talking about. I mean, that's something you can do today that people couldn't do in yesteryear. The other thing is because he's a romantic, because I just told you what this guy was really wanted to do and the things he tried to do, there is this like cry for romanticism all the time when he's writing. Sometimes you'll be like bored, and then all of a sudden there's 3 or 4 exclamation points where you feel the passion for what he's writing. He's passionate about it. And it's like something, like let's say you read Jordan Peterson's book, Maps of Meaning. You're not going to get that. I love Jordan Peterson, his writing, but, when Nietzsche writes, sometimes you're like, yes, he's life-affirming, but he's also angry, and he's funny. He's funny. And then another thing about Nietzsche is he writes with sometimes a different process of thinking. So when I was talking to you about this yesterday, that when you're reading Beyond Good and Evil, sometimes it's good to visualize what he's saying. And you can see where he's talking about something here and how it's attached to this. And once you visualize something, and not just read the words and conceptualize what's being said, but you visualize like a map what he's saying, then it's very easy. But he doesn't always do that. Sometimes he gets a little bit like Jung did later, where he gets almost impressionistic and you sort of have a hard time. As a matter of fact, a lot of times when I'm reading Nietzsche, I go, oh, I can't remember what I just read. That whole impressionistic thing, where you're like, I know what I was reading. And while I was reading, I was like, yeah. And then immediately afterwards, I'm like, what the hell? I got to go back and read that. And then I revisit it in the thought. I'm like, oh yeah, that was the thought. Okay, I've got the thought again. It's taxing. The other thing about Nietzsche when he writes is, I said he was funny, right? Well, let's talk now about Beyond Good and Evil. The first beginning part of Beyond Good and Evil is kind of funny. Even at points where he may not try to be funny. But what he's doing for the beginning of Beyond Good and Evil is he's taking modern philosophy, modern philosophers, Schopenhauer, Spinoza, Immanuel Kant. I'm trying to think of who else. He's talking. The Stoics aren't modern, but he's going off on the Stoics. He's, for lack of a better word, he's going off on them, and he's showing you that they're the fallacies in their thinking. He says, the Stoics think this way, and he's taking them apart, and sometimes it's funny. Sometimes he's even laughing. He goes, I laugh, ha! And he picks on them with clever wording. I'm trying to think of the one that said, I think, therefore I am. What's wrong with me? The most basic philosophy, it'll hit me in a second. I think, therefore, René Descartes. I think, therefore I am. He takes that apart with playing with words, because René Descartes' words, I think, therefore I am. Well, how do I exist? I think, I'm thinking. That's the most basic. I'm taking it apart, deconstructing down to I think, also bin ich, I am. And then Nietzsche plays with the words until he makes it lächerlich. He makes it laughable, what Descartes did, and basically says, you fucked up, because a thought can come from anywhere. The thought is there. Doesn't mean you are. And he does that. Let's talk about Descartes, René Descartes, the French philosopher. He does that because he also wants to go back and say, not only are they flawed in their logic, like René Descartes, but they're flawed, and here it comes, on knowing I'm going beyond good and evil. That's what this is about, this book. And they do not understand morality. He basically is saying for each one of them that the standpoint from which they are asking their questions is wrong, because they assume there is a type of good, and a type of evil. And Nietzsche explains, what if the things that are bad aren't? What if? Then every single question asked by Schopenhauer, he really has a problem with Schopenhauer. Let's go on to that. Schopenhauer's philosophy that Nietzsche has a problem with is that life is basically suffering and it sucks, and life isn't worth living. And you should try to live as little as possible, and that life is basically, Schopenhauer has this thing that Nietzsche combines with Christianity, which he hates. And now we'll come to what I talked about yesterday, the slave mentality. And this is why he says there's a fallacy. People are philosophers base what is good and evil, what is right and wrong, on Judeo-Christian morality. So because they do that, all the propositions and all of their thought processes are wrong. Because he says, and this moves on a little bit, he says that they are using a Christian morality that is based on the slave mentality, which I talked about yesterday. Let's go through another one. Schopenhauer does that. Immanuel Kant gets picked on for all the reasons that everyone does, because he sees him as having also this Christian morality, which is wrong from the beginning, Nietzsche says, because it's the slave morality and the herd morality, the herd mentality later in later books, but now the slave morality. And Immanuel Kant is a child of his philosophy is born out of his personality. And that is Nietzsche's other problem in Beyond Good and Evil, that all of these philosophers, they all think a certain way. They all have certain personalities. They all have certain traits and problems in their lives. And because they have these problems, they are justifying their lives and their problems through their philosophies. Spinoza is a mathematician, and he's slightly autistic. So all of his philosophy is based on math. Well, that's wrong. Schopenhauer hates life. He's lebensverneinend, Nietzsche says. He negates life. And he is suffering, and he tries to, Schopenhauer says the only real life is to go out in the woods and be alone. Sounds good. Get away from mankind. Try to remove yourself. And because that's his personal problem, he tries to justify it through his philosophy. And Nietzsche says, instead of using your personal problems, and I just said before, it's ironic because Nietzsche has his own personal problems, which come through in his philosophy, but still, he said each one of these people is using their personal psychological problems to justify what they're, that's how they're justifying their personal psychological problems through their philosophical ponderings. They're trying to justify it. And they're all on a basis of a morality which Nietzsche believes, and he proves, or tries to prove, is not correct. And that is the slave mentality, the slave morality, which once again, I'll reiterate what that is. Nietzsche is saying that people who are enslaved, the thousands of years of, the millennials of being slaves, builds traditions and morality. And everything that the slave loves is going to be the opposite of what the ruling class loves. The warrior is one way, and the slave is another. And the ruler is one way, and the slave is another. And his problem with Judeo-Christianity is that, like Schopenhauer, it says that we will never be powerful because we are too weak. Then they come up with a morality that the meek, the lamb, the lemmer, they will inherit the earth. They will inherit the world, that the weak inherit the world. And that brings us to the second point in Beyond Good and Evil. Nietzsche uses a word called power. Power. When I first came to Germany, people would say, "Boah, du hast richtig power." You've got a lot of power, a lot of strength. And then when you study political science, power is the powerful. An army is powerful, or a politician has power, or a country has power. But Nietzsche doesn't use that word that way. He doesn't really use it that way. Nietzsche sees the word power as being the ingredient that has to do with the struggle to survive. He says, this is maybe the best, or he writes or uses a metaphor, the best version is eating. That plants are striving with their power to exist. Or let's say, make it easier for you. A bunny or a wolf or any animal is trying to exist. It's willing itself to exist. It wants power over this is ecological, over its environment. And the hunter wants to take its power away so that it can consume its energy by killing it and eating it, and then absorbing its power and then having that energy. And by the way, this idea of energy will become very important later for people who are in love with Nietzsche's philosophies, like George Bataille or Blanchot. The Accursed Share, the book The Accursed Share, for those who are interested. But energy and power is what Nietzsche sees as being the driving force of what is morality, what is true and not true. And he sees all animals, all people vying for positions of power to survive. And that the world is made up of power, of using other people's energy. And the slave says, I have no power, actually. I believe that, that being has no way of being powerful. So instead of embracing instead of embracing nature and the natural order of things, where power plays a key role, the slave makes a psychological perversion in his or her mind and does something unnatural. And by the way, the word unnatural is a word that isn't used. You never hear it anymore. Unnatürlich, something unnatural, is seen in the Romantic and Sturm und Drang. Even if you read some of the great literature that spawned the books of Dracula and the werewolf, or Frankenstein is earlier, but when you read those books, you will hear that phrase, it is etwas unnatürlich, something unnatural. Dracula is unnatural. That's natural to me is like food. This food is natural food. It's very healthy. It's organic, or something that's with nature. But natural has this thing of being healthy. It is in harmony with nature. Something that is unnatural, like Dracula. Let's look at Dracula just for a second. Bram Stoker's Dracula is not harmonizing with nature. The natural laws of the universe, or of the world, or of our solar system, do not apply to Dracula. As a matter of fact, one of the most natural laws, the thing that is most important for nature, is sunlight. And because Dracula is unnatural, he can't go into the sunlight. As a matter of fact, the thing that gives you your visage, the reflection of light, doesn't apply to him. When he looks in the mirror, he has no reflection because he is not of the natural world. And they would say, and then someone like Van Helsing would say something unnatural, and that would put fear into people. Well, Nietzsche is saying that the slave mentality is unnatural. The natural order of things, they've perverted it, and they're doing something that is wrong. The natural order of willing to power, of seeing power and how it is, they are against that. Instead of saying, you have to be strong to go for it, they can't. So all the things that are unnatural become the morality of the slaves. And this isn't like, I said once again, a 100-year process or a 500-year process. Slavery, as we know, if we look at Göbekli Tepe, we know began with agriculture. When people were hunting, there were hierarchies. If you understand how American Indians, people that that observed American Indians as settlers, they saw there was definitely a hierarchy, especially when they took slaves. But slavery was quite different. People earned, just through a matter of time, a place in the community, in these hunter and gatherer communities. And then slavery was kind of over. It was almost like a learning period, a horrible, hard learning period that you may not survive. But slavery in the sense of agriculture, there can be no moving into the realm of the class above you, because every single season, slaves are needed to continually harvest and work the land. And because of the energy that is needed to get food, to get energy from the land, the amount of work that needs to be done to plant and harvest, you have to have workers. You have to have workers. Planting for yourself, you just get by. If you need to plant more, you need help. Hunting, you can almost go out by yourself with a bow and arrow, with a rifle, with a spear for small game. I mean, hunters go out by themselves a lot. or with a group of your friends, get the meat, bring it back, everybody has a job, tanning the hides, smoking the meat or curing the meat, rendering whatever animal it is. Everybody's got a job. And then there's enough, hopefully, for everyone from the energy of that animal that was killed that you will consume. That's a natural order of things. But planting, just planting on a large scale, you need to enslave. You need human energy that you control, that's under you. And that is the beginning of most people think the beginning of slavery, in the sense that we're going to see it in history for thousands of years. So to make a lot with those kind of hierarchies. So Nietzsche is concerned with the slave morality that we are now, he believes, when I say now, we're talking about the 1880s, we are now living in a time, and it bothered Nietzsche enormously, where the slave morality, the slave mentality, won. It's one. If you go to the church, the Christian church has taken over our morality, and there is an incongruity, or even worse, a cacophony, or a disharmony in the soul and mind of every human. They are forced to adhere to rules and laws and traditions that were set up on an unnatural lie, an unharmonic lie that has nothing that negates power, the natural laws of power. But at the same time, we are humans, and genetically, it is innate to us to want to will ourselves to power, to be above others, to be strong, even if we can't be. So there is a sort of schizophrenia, a chasm in all humans during this time, and it leads to an incredible amount of illness. So the idea of power, that's the second part. Yesterday I talked about the first part of Beyond Good and Evil, where Nietzsche, where he in the beginning of the book, he takes apart each and every modern philosophical direction that's being taken by people like Immanuel Kant or Schopenhauer, and shows you that not only do they make mistakes in their logic is wrong from the beginning, because they are beginning at the standpoint from which they base their questions and their thinking and their process is from a sick lie that has been told for a long time. And Nietzsche sees it that Christianity, or Judeo-Christianity, which was under the sword and the power of Rome, is where it really took off and became where the unnatural situation with power started to become almost universal in the culture. And this is his main problem with Judaism and with Christianity. I'm just going to sneeze for a minute. Hold on 1 second. Because Nietzsche would say I was a wimp for sneezing, for not holding it back. No, I'm just kidding. That's actually not true. So that's the part 2 I want to talk about today. I hit 1 hour. And and something else I wanted to say. We'll talk tomorrow more about Beyond Good and Evil. I wanted to also say that don't forget that this book is called Beyond Good and Evil, a prelude for the future. Nietzsche didn't mean for this to be some sort of great work or book. It's really him going up to his readers and let's say his followers, just for the sake of argument, and saying, I'm going to introduce you to my way of thinking so that the next books, I don't know how many I'm going to be able to write. As a matter of fact, one book he wrote, he was quite ill. But anyway, I am going to write, and so that you are ready to understand these books. Beyond Good and Evil is important because he is introducing you to the basic ideas in his philosophy so that you can understand the later books. And so it's a short book, actually. What is that? In my memory, 115 pages or something like that. But there's a lot packed into it. It's difficult to read. Pardon me. And it's almost like you see Nietzsche has been thinking about it. He's not really like, he's always thinking, but it's his introduction to this way of thinking which people are in shock. How dare he? You can imagine, his father was a minister. Nietzsche studied theology and said, no, I'm not doing this. I talked about that yesterday. You can imagine during a time, he's basically saying humans have taken a wrong turn. Humanity has taken the wrong turn. And like I said yesterday at the end of our session yesterday talking about beyond good and evil, Nietzsche is going to show us a way, as I mentioned yesterday, to break away from those chains of this lie. Embrace power. Will yourself to become who you actually are. Because that's Nietzsche's next thing that's going to come tomorrow. How the hell can you, in a society, especially in 1880, how the hell are you going to become who you really are? And that'll be for tomorrow. And so, did you learn anything? Is there any questions that you want to ask?
I have a question, but that's probably not really for today. Yesterday you mentioned that despite all this, Nietzsche still really liked Christianity.
Yes, and I'll tell you why. And I'm so glad you brought that up. Okay, so what Nietzsche sees in Christianity, well, I'm going to say this in this way. To do the things that Nietzsche is doing, most philosophers sit down. Well, Nietzsche talks about this also, or writes about this in Beyond Good and Evil, that, and I think I mentioned this, philosophers spend a lot of time navel-gazing, looking at themselves from the supposition. They are looking at themselves and then trying out of their own feeble, imperfect personalities, their own imperfect minds, trying to create a philosophy and using then this fallible tradition, as Nietzsche sees it, fallible morals, the wrong morality, not understanding the history of morality, and really just, he sees them as being egoist. It's all about them. The Stoics, that's his biggest problem. Stoics are all about, what he calls Stoics? Tyrants. Mm-hmm. They're tyrants. And I think the word that people would use today is they're narcissist. Now, no, I'm sure a bunch of people listening to this will get mad, but what could be more narcissistic, sorry, I never speak English anymore, or tyrannical than you deciding what is worth thinking about? Nietzsche says, you tyrants, isn't it the most important thing, zu auseinandersetzen, to combat ideas with people and not just become some gefühllos, emotionless thing that just goes, no, I'm not going to let anything bother me. Life, Nietzsche loves the struggle. So what Nietzsche loves is to see people struggling against certain moralities, and that in the way that they evolve into them becoming the closest they can. The struggle is the most important thing. Whether they make it or not, that would be the best thing. That would be the best scene, so to speak. But watching them struggle, remember, Nietzsche is a romantic. Remember, he's a Prussian that wants to go to war. He wants to battle. He wants to fight and struggle. And that is what a human is supposed to do. And Nietzsche sees the dichotomy, or better said, what's a better word for this dichotomy? There's a hypocritical phase in Christianity where, I talked about Paulus yesterday. All of, not just Paulus, but every single one of the people that are that are surrounding Jesus, all of his apostles, all of them, were one thing that was adhering to tradition and society, and they had to, you're laughing because I'm pointing with my fingers, but they were one thing, and they had to break with tradition, and that break is as good as it being illegal. It is, imagine Nietzsche breaking with the tradition of becoming a pastor with a father who has his own congregation, that he's taken care of, and the pride of that father that his son will take on the congregation. Well, Nietzsche sees that Simon Petrus has to break with who he was to evolve and become something else. Simon Petrus was not a weak man. Peter is not a weak follower. He is the MMA heavyweight champion of Judea. He is a bare-knuckle fighter. He is respected. And not only that, he's a little out of control. He's Conor McGregor as a heavyweight, and he's just, he's also, there are boxers like, let's say, Muhammad Ali. Always said he abhorred, he hated violence. Howie Long, he's a great football player, number 77 for the Houston Oilers back in the 80s and 90s. He was a hell of a linebacker, but he said, I hate violence. I'm a very good man, but I hate violence. Well, Peter is an incredibly good fighter, and he's a violent man. And he has to lay down his natural temperance, his natural temperament for enjoying violence to follow Christ. Matthew, I think it is, he meets Christ. He is a tax collector, a good one. And let me tell you, tax collecting at that time, well, one of your favorite dogs has to do with tax collecting.
Doberman.
The Doberman Pinscher was made to help tax collectors, was bred for tax collecting. Tax collecting wasn't, people didn't do it freely. People had to be forced at the edge of a sword, or with those Doberman Pinschers. Well, you can imagine, Matthew wasn't going around collecting taxes, and it was an easy job. And he meets Jesus, and that's it. Lets his job fall. You didn't just become a tax collector because you were a nice guy. The Roman Römische Reich, the Roman Empire, had to trust you. I'm sure there were some very steep stipulations, some very difficult prerequisites to being trusted with the Kaiser's coin. And he let all that fall immediately to follow Jesus and to evolve into what he was. Paul, or Saul was originally his name. I used to have problems with him, but it's a fascinating story because he is literally someone who persecutes Christians. That's his job. He is a murderer. He's not a nice guy. And he comes out of, I think he comes out of the area of Iraq or Iran. I can't remember. But he has an instance that sounds like epilepsy or a really bad migraine with an aura. I don't know, whatever did it. It laid him low. He fell to the ground and he was out. He went blind, and there was bright light, and had this, spoke with Jesus. This is after Jesus had left the earth. He was the only one who in the physical realm actually didn't know Jesus, but that's a problem that a lot of people have with Paul. But Paul actually has to also evolves to become something absolutely different. So you have this in all kinds of ways. I can't remember what they were. Joseph of what was Joseph of Eritrea? I can't think of his name now. Was a very wealthy man and gave away all his money. He was a businessman. I don't think he gave away all his money because he still had quite a bit of money when, after Jesus had been crucified, he had paid for, I think, where Jesus had been brought, and he had paid for whatever the funeral processions were. But still, that you're seeing that people are leaving who they were and who they would have always been, and there is some impetus in this man that's making them drop everything, and they seem to be quite successful, many of them, even if it's just a fisherman that likes to beat people up like Peter is, and evolving into something else based on something that they believe. Nietzsche's problem is he loves seeing them struggle to become something other than what they have been taught to be, but he believes that the Judeo-Christian traditions that actually come that that are being propagated around those stories and then become primarily important are the things that are the big problem in Christianity, because it embraces the slave mentality. And I'll tell you why it's such a contradiction that that in some ways he liked these people in Christianity. Because a slave doesn't change. The slave is a slave, and the slave mentality, the slave traditions that he hates, the slave morality that Nietzsche can't stand, that he's disgusted with, that he sees destroying the world. He also is aware that the chance of someone who has embraced those traditions, that's been brought up with it, is virtually zero that they will change. There's no way for them to evolve. And that these people that are coming out of those this is now Judeo traditions because there's Christianity as a name doesn't exist yet, that they're able to break from those 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago. I am always impressed with Nietzsche breaking from the chains of his father and the traditions of that time. Well, how the hell hard was it for Paul, for any of them, for Thomas, for any of the apostles, to break in a radical way from the power of the rabbis? It must have been a burden, a weight that just must have felt like the world was on your shoulders, crushing you. But somehow, through this person, they were freed by it. And Christianity, Nietzsche tends to have this thing where he thinks that Christianity could have gone and should have gone and was supposed to go in a different direction. And that's also, like you were saying. So and the other thing is that Nietzsche himself never really breaks with Christianity. He's constantly, it is the basis of his arguments. Well, there's another point called atomization that we'll talk about tomorrow that has to do with beyond good and evil, and also has to do with the will of power. I should have mentioned that, but we're into an hour and 12 minutes. And but I really wanted to get a little more into the meat and potatoes. One thing I wanted to say is, look, we're into an hour and 12 minutes, and theoretically I could open Beyond Good and Evil and go through one point after another. I don't think anyone has ever did that, and I don't want to say it's impossible, but it would just take so long, I can tell you that if you're looking for relatively early somewhere around page 5, probably not, but really early, the statement comes that these things are beyond good and evil, and you get this really cool feeling. Oh, here's where he mentions the title of the book. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And there's so many quotes in there. I sent you one last night. Did you read it?
Yeah.
I think it was the one about the Stoics, because I was talking about the Stoics are tyrants. Because we were talking about Stoicism today, and I'm sorry that I didn't apply a lot of the things today, but I wanted to get into the meat and potatoes, into the bones and the flesh of Beyond Good and Evil, and talk about power, and talk a little bit about Nietzsche so people can understand where he's coming from. But I'm going to tell you something. Even if you don't understand fully what he's writing, and when I first read it, I was 19 and I did not, and I'm not going to be as arrogant as to say that I even understand it now fully, but even not then, it does have this, the Germans call this Aufbaukunst or Aufbauliteratur, like Beethoven was. I'm sorry? It builds you. It's building you. Not building like the Germans use the word build for educating. It builds you up in your soul. It's a really good feeling reading it, because the energy this guy has is amazing. And he is a romantic. So it's fun to read a romantic, someone who is affirming, life affirming, and affirming about people. And that's the thing I also wanted to say. Nietzsche's in this for humanity. That's something that you really feel about Nietzsche. It's not Spinoza trying to be like, look how good I am at math, or Immanuel Kant being like, I never leave my house, or I never leave the university in Königsberg. Look how, they called Immanuel Kant Kleinbürgertum. I can't even remember what that is in English, but just like someone who never someone who's really conservative that never leaves their house and just is in their garden all the time. I don't even know what that word is. Kleinberger too.
Doesn't exist.
They used to say about Kant, der kann nicht über den Tellerrand schauen. He can't look beyond his plate. The plate that he's eating. That's how limited his vision is of the world. That's another thing, because that's the way it was. He thought that East Prussia, that Königsberg University, was the end-all and be-all of the world. Well, and that's the thing that you also get with Nietzsche. Nietzsche will surprise you. You think, okay, this is a Prussian guy, not Prussian guy, but this is a guy who was in the Prussian military. It's the 1870s, 80s, 90s. So you think to yourself, how much does he know about the world? He brings up things sometimes about different languages, about places like Borneo and China and India and the United States, and you go, oh my goodness, he knows so much about philosophy and history and religions and math and things going on in the world and the physical world. And I'm surprised I'm also subtly surprised about how much more scientifically up to date he is. There's not a lot of things that just have not been that haven't been developed yet, and in math and in sciences, but there's the ideas that are behind them, and he's right up to date with them, and so in many ways he freaks me out. I keep thinking he's not going to be as modern in his thoughts, but he is, and of course, being a genius, he speaks and writes in all these languages. And he's able to reference them. And he's an etymologist. He literally, will take a language apart and go back to Sumerian, go back to ancient Greek. And that makes him, and then of course with the passion, like I said, and the romantic and humor, it's really fun. And with Nietzsche sometimes, sadly, because he loves humanity, he's doing this, and you can tell he's not doing it for himself. Because he could just sit at home. He's sick. He's ill. He's not doing well. But it's important to him. He feels that he is saving humanity. And there's an ego there. When he got very ill, he was espousing the idea that he was like Christ or something. Not Christ, but, that he was, and that was mostly had to do with his illness. But you do not get a feeling that this guy is writing for himself by any means. As a matter of fact, you can tell that in many ways, I think he was making himself immensely unpopular. It could have been much easier for him, but he abhors that. But you have to know a little bit about Plato. He likes to talk about Epicurus. So there's a couple of things that you should know about. And if you don't, and you're just going to pick up Nietzsche, let's say you're going to pick up Beyond Good and Evil, or you can get it as a PDF, at least in Germany, you can get it for free anywhere, online, or go to the library and get it for free. Don't be scared of it today. Because you have the internet, you can Google. If you don't know Latin or Greek, well, you can literally put it in the machine. Oh, he had a funny thing I didn't know. Oh, this was what it was. That what did he say in Beyond Good and Evil? That I can't remember which philosopher it was, and I want to say it's Spinoza. No, it might have been the Stoics. That they are like donkeys that are proud of themselves. But he uses a Greek aphorism or something like that, an asses or something, an ass, something that are proud of themselves marching on, like dumb donkeys marching on that are proud of themselves. And it must have been something, I'm too stupid to know, this must have been something that Epicurus or Plato wrote, and so there's some, and it's funny. Sometimes he has these fun things. You're like, ooh, that looks like it's something in Latin something in Old Greek, and I have to figure it out. And then you look at it, and you're like, oh, it's a joke. And he has a lot of jokes like that, Okay, that one doesn't seem very funny, but it is when you see it in the context. All right, so there you go. That was kind of a boring version compared to yesterday, but I had to get into the actual inner Ryan. I had to get into the guts of the book a bit, and then tomorrow we'll talk a little bit more. I think tomorrow we'll finish it up, because you could talk about Beyond Good and Evil probably forever, not forever, but for a long time. And that'll be it. All right, everyone. We'll talk to you tomorrow.